Here is every major event that almost fucked our entire Earth, explained. Theia Impact. Imagine you teleported 4,500,000,000 years ago. Then you look up and see a second sun, but it isn't a sun. It's a Mars-sized protoplanet named Theia, and it is traveling at 25,000 miles per hour directly toward you. The impact wasn't just a collision, it was a total liquid reset. If you were there, you wouldn't have heard a sound because the atmosphere was non-existent, but you would have felt the entire world physically crushed beneath your feet. Two worlds essentially merged into a single glowing ocean of magma. The kinetic energy was so extreme it tilted the Earth's axis forever and blasted trillions of tons of vaporized debris into space. That debris eventually clumped together to form the moon, which is really just a permanent reminder of the first time our world was truly fucked. This impact literally turned the Earth into a giant floating blender of lava, erasing any chance for life for the next several 100,000,000 years.
Please subscribe.
The oxygen apocalypse. 2,400,000,000 years ago, Earth committed its first act of planetary mass murder. We think of oxygen as the spark of life, but for the organisms that ruled the world back then, it was a corrosive, lethal chemical weapon. A tiny group of bacteria called cyanobacteria evolved a new way to eat, photosynthesis. They began pumping out oxygen as a waste product, and it was the most successful biological terror attack in history. If you were standing on the ancient coast, you wouldn't see a blue ocean. You would watch the water turn a sickening deep red as the iron in the sea literally rusted on a global scale. This wasn't a slow change, it was a total atmospheric flip. The oxygen reacted with the methane that kept Earth warm, stripping away the planet's greenhouse blanket and turning the air into a toxic gas chamber for 99% of all living things. They weren't just killed, they were dissolved by the very air they touched. Earth essentially gassed its own children to pave the way for a new world, leaving the planet as a lifeless, rusted ball for millions of years. Snowball Earth. 700,000,000 years ago, a runaway cooling effect sent glaciers screaming from the poles all the way to the equator. If you were standing in what is now a tropical paradise during Snowball Earth, you wouldn't see trees or jungles. You would see a solid wall of ice 3 miles thick. The entire ocean was capped by a frozen crust, cutting off the sun and starving the life beneath it of any hope. The world became so white that it reflected almost all solar energy back into the dark void, locking the planet in a self-perpetuating death loop. It was a white, silent tomb that nearly snuffed out the flame of life forever. Earth stayed in this frozen prison for millions of years, nearly becoming a dead rock like the moons of Jupiter. The only thing that saved us was the Earth's internal rage. Massive volcanoes eventually punched through the miles of ice, leaking enough carbon dioxide into the sky to create a super greenhouse effect that finally shattered the frozen shell. The Permian Triassic Extinction. 252,000,000 years ago, Earth decided to finish nearly everything alive. This wasn't just an extinction. It was a planetary liquidation known as the Great Dying. If you were standing in what is now Siberia during this time, you wouldn't be standing on solid ground for long. A massive volcanic rift known as the Siberian Traps ripped open, vomiting enough lava to cover the entire United States in a mile-thick layer. But the lava wasn't the real killer. It was the chemical warfare. The eruptions ignited massive coal beds, pumping billions of tons of carbon dioxide and toxic methane into the sky. The planet turned into a literal pressure cooker. If you were on a beach, you would watch the ocean turn a sickly shade of purple as the water lost its oxygen and became a breeding ground for hydrogen sulfide belching bacteria. The air became so toxic and hot that 96% of all marine species and 70% of land animals were simply erased from existence. It was the closest life has ever come to being completely deleted. The Chicxulub Impact. 67,000,000 years ago, the reign of the most powerful creatures to ever walk the Earth was ended by a rock the size of Mount Everest. Imagine standing in the Yucatan Peninsula on a perfectly normal Tuesday. You look up and see a mountain-sized asteroid named Chicxulub ripping through the atmosphere at 45,000 miles per hour. It didn't just hit the ground, it punched a hole through the crust and into the mantle.
Please subscribe.
The impact was equivalent to the force of 100,000,000 megatons of TNT. If you were within 1,000 miles, the sound would have liquefied your internal organs before the shockwave even reached you. A wall of fire thousands of degrees hot expanded outward, igniting every forest on Earth instantly. But the nightmare was just beginning. The impact vaporized massive amounts of sulfur, blasting it into the stratosphere and blocking out the sun for years. Dinosaurs that survived the initial firestorm wandered through a pitch-black frozen world, starving to death as the food chain collapsed. The late Devonian algal bloom. 375 million years ago, Earth was fucked by something you would never expect. Trees. For millions of years, our gay nerd friend told us,
Save trees, save lives.
but he wasn't right, hell yeah. Because the first true forests began to explode across the continents. It sounds like a paradise, but it was actually a global disaster. These new trees grew deep roots that shattered the ancient rocks, unlocking trillions of tons of nutrients and minerals that had been trapped for ages. When the rain washed this massive chemical cocktail into the oceans, it triggered a biological explosion of green slime. If you were standing on a Devonian beach, you would watch the crystal clear water turn into a thick, neon green soup of algae. This bloom sucked every single molecule of oxygen out of the water, creating massive dead zones that turned the oceans into a global graveyard. Thousands of species of fish and ancient sea monsters were essentially suffocated to death in their own homes. To make matters worse, the massive surge in plant life sucked so much carbon dioxide out of the air that it triggered a global cooling event, sending the planet into a chaotic cycle of freezing and suffocating. The Toba super eruption. 74,000 years ago, the entire human race was almost deleted by a single mountain in Sumatra. This wasn't just a volcanic eruption. It was a planetary reset that turned the sky into a ceiling of ash. The Toba supervolcano exploded with the force of 3,000 megatons, blasting 800 cubic kilometers of ash and toxic sulfur into the atmosphere. If you were standing anywhere in Southeast Asia, you wouldn't just see smoke. You would see the sky physically disappear as a cloud of hot, suffocating ash raced toward you at the speed of sound. The eruption was so massive it triggered a volcanic winter that lasted for a decade, dropping global temperatures by up to 27 degrees Fahrenheit. Crops failed globally, and the sun became a dim, sickly ghost behind the thick layer of ash. This event was so devastating that it reduced the entire human population to just a few thousand individuals. Every single human being alive today is a product of that tiny group of survivors who somehow survived this YouTube Shorts disaster. The Central Atlantic Magmatic Province. 200 million years ago, Earth decided it was tired of being a single supercontinent and chose to rip itself in half. This is the Triassic-Jurassic reset, and it was one of the most violent geological tantrums in history. Imagine standing in the middle of Pangaea, a landmass that stretched from pole to pole. Suddenly, the ground beneath your feet doesn't just shake, it tears open. A massive volcanic rift, thousands of miles long, ripped across what is now North America, South America, and Africa. This wasn't a single volcano. It was a wall of fire that vomited lava for 600,000 years. If you were there, you would see fountains of liquid fire shooting miles into the air, while the sky turned a bruised, permanent purple from the billions of tons of sulfur and carbon dioxide. The heat was so intense it triggered a global warming spike that cooked half of all species on the planet. The oceans became so acidic they literally dissolved the shells of sea creatures while they were still alive. Earth just wanted to beat Mark Rober. The Red Midnight. In September 1859, Earth faced a threat that didn't come from the ground, but from a cosmic middle finger sent by the sun. This is the Carrington event, the most powerful solar storm ever recorded. Imagine it is 1 in the morning in the middle of the 19th century. Suddenly, the entire sky turns a deep, terrifying blood red. The northern lights were so bright that people in Cuba and Hawaii could read the newspaper by its glow. People were thinking that the sun was rising in the middle of the night, but for the technology of the time, it was a nightmare. Telegraph wires began to hiss and spark, catching fire and shocking operators even after they were disconnected from their batteries. If this happened today, it wouldn't just be a pretty light show. It would be a total technological reset. The surge of geomagnetic energy would fry every satellite in orbit and melt the global power grid instantly. We would be plunged into a dark age in seconds, with no internet, no banking, and no way to feed billions of people. In 1859, we got lucky because we didn't rely on wires to survive, but it was a warning shot that proves the sun can fuck our entire planet whenever it wants. The continent killer. 8,200 years ago, Earth decided to physically delete a piece of Europe because of the RAM price, but this wasn't a slow rise in sea levels. It was a sudden, violent drowning known as the Storegga Slide. Imagine you are living in Doggerland, a massive, fertile plain that used to connect England to Denmark. It was a hunter-gatherer paradise. Then, off the coast of Norway, an area of the ocean floor the size of Scotland suddenly collapsed. Trillions of tons of dirt slid into the deep sea, triggering a tsunami so massive it defied physics. If you were standing on the coast of Doggerland, you wouldn't just see a wave. You would see the entire horizon rise up and become a wall of black water 80 feet high, traveling at hundreds of miles per hour. The wave didn't just hit the coast, it swept across the entire continent, over rivers, through forests, and over entire civilizations in minutes. Earth essentially pulled the carpet out from under the feet of early humanity, permanently erasing a landmass and sending it to the bottom of the North Sea. So, what is the lesson after 4,500,000,000 years of planetary murder? It's that we are living living in a temporary pause. And please subscribe. I want to make some penny. And if you wanted to talk me about this video or anything, you can hit me on Discord. I only take 10 cents for letting anyone hit me.